So 'n bietjie interessante en 'n moeilike onderwerp vanoggend, maar 'n boek wat geskryf is oor die Parys en hulle noem dit nou maar die Parys 6, en dit kry mens maar altyd 'n tema en 'n titel. Wag, wat? Sorry, ek het nie geluister vir die regisseur, maar die laaste nuus was nou, so 8 Mei is dit was nou 'n situasie gewees waar daar 'n plaasaanval was en Omlokie het sy knoppie gedruk. En die ouens het die twee ouens gevang en dit was nou hulle bietjie gewiks en die ouens is oorlede, maar hulle is almal vry op moordklagte en hulle skuldig bevind aanranding met die doel om ernstig te beseer. En ek dink daar is so veel aspekte. Dit is 'n saak wat nou al 4 jaar aangegaan het en hulle was nou verlede week besig, jy weet, vir die vonnisoplegging ter versagting, en dan word hulle nou in Desember word uitgestel, sal die groep boere nou gevonnis word. Maar die boek, ons gaan nou baie meer uitvind. Andrew Harding het 'n boek geskryf, These Are Not Gentle People, A True South African Story. Ongelooflik interessant, en voor jy nou dadelik op die wawel spring en dink dis eensydigheid, regtig ongelooflik moeite gedoen. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time, and I just want to start to introduce you to our viewers and listeners. You're a totally internationally acclaimed writer, and you're a correspondent for BBC News, and you've been in South Africa since 1991, but you've been all over the world. So just a little bit of background. I mean, you've been in some dangerous situations as a journalist. So just introduce yourself with a bit of background.
Thank you very much. I've been in South Africa since 2009, actually, but I was set off from London as a young want-to-be journalist, freelancer in 1991, and I went to Moscow just as the Soviet Union was collapsing, and ended up finding plenty of work for a young journalist there. As you say, I've covered lots of conflicts, the war in Chechnya, the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan. I've been into Burma, been kicked out of Burma. I have, in 2000, I moved to Nairobi and spent 4 years covering East Africa, and then went to Asia, based in Singapore and Bangkok, and covered, as I say, Burma, the tsunami, you may remember, in Indonesia, China, India, and so on. So a big part of the world I've attempted to do some reporting from, and since 2009, yes, trying to cover stories, good, bad, different, all over Africa.
Yes, my mistake. I see you left Britain in 1991. And then also, I mean, Emmy winner. So it's a privilege to speak to you this morning. It's amazing.
Thank you. I mean, it's always nice to get awards. That was for our reporting from the Central African Republic.
And you covered the Oscar Pistorius case in South Africa, but then this Parys thing happened. And it's amazing. And I haven't read the book, but just seeing reviews on your blog, other interviews, it's, you were gripped by the story. And I think the way you did it is just amazing. You spoke to basically everyone. We're going to get there, but just why were you gripped by the story? What was the initial thing that said, listen, as a journalist, I want to see what happened here?
So as you say, I covered the Oscar Pistorius trial, and I found I'd never covered a trial from start to finish. And of course, that was a particularly gripping, dramatic trial. And I thought I wanted to write a second book, and I was looking for something similar, but something perhaps more connected to ordinary South Africa. And I stumbled upon this trial in Paris. I guess, like a lot of people, had heard briefly about it. A tale which seemed to go against the grain of normal farm killings. You hear of white farmers being killed in their homes. This was a very different story. In January 2016, a group of white farmers chased 2 black farm workers who they suspected had just robbed or attempted to rob one of their elder neighbors. They then beat these 2 men, and the following day, the 2 black farm workers were dead. What interested me, what gripped me from early on when I went to see the bail hearings was, first of all, the politics. As so often in these cases, you could see the pressure on the justice system from the ANC, from the EFF, and also from right-wingers, white right-wingers who came to town also to campaign and to demonstrate. And you could see how this very sad story was being grabbed and used for political purposes. But then as I got to know the families of everyone involved, I realized, of course, that really at the heart of this was just a devastating story about about families, about communities, and about the divisions within those families as people started to turn against each other. Members of the Van der Westhuizen farming clan who were on trial started to turn against each other and turn state witnesses, for instance.
And what I like, and I really want to motivate people to get this book, is that you spoke to everyone on all sides. You spent time, and that's what I think is a flaw still in our journalism now and then. You know, we'll attend the trial, and you get a one-side, news. And you went to Paris, but to Mahole as well. And I like it that it says more than 100 times you've been to Paris writing this book. You went to church services, funerals, shacks, microbreweries, taverns, coffee shops, political rallies, bowling greens. So you really covered this down on all sides. And I think there's some people that spoke to you anonymously, and it's very interesting to get the two sides of the story. Like I was really touched by the mother whose son was killed, and the way you explained it, that everyone was very worried about Wimluki because of the brutal murder of two people and the woman that's body was taken in the fridge. So it's so complex. For yourself, did you find a balance to try to understand the story?
I don't know if I found a balance. As you say, I tried to speak to everyone, and I was very lucky that I had time. I mean, over the course of 4 years, turning up in that court, I think people understood that I was not there to try and get a scoop for the newspapers. I was really just trying to understand on each side, and I made a great show of going to each side of the Hawks, the prosecutors, the white farming family, as you say, the families of the two black men, Simon Jibeba and Samuel Chicha, who died. And of course, I wanted to bring their stories back to life and explain or try to find out what they were really doing that night. Had they gone to rob the elderly white farmer, Umludi Van der Westhuizen, or was it more complicated than that? And what I ended up realizing was that the truth was almost impossible to find in this case. There were so many different stories. Everyone had their own very strong opinion about who did what, when. And so I essentially put it all on the page, accepted that the ambiguity was a necessary part of the story, and I ultimately try and leave people, to some extent, to decide who's guilty, who's not guilty, and also to understand what it felt like from each side, if you like, of the racial divide, but not just the racial divide. It's about class, it's about family, but to try and if you portray what it felt like to stand in each different person's shoes, I think you realize that the story is so much more complex and so much more difficult than it's sometimes easy to kind of brush aside a double murder trial like that as something very simple. But it wasn't. It was immensely complex. And the trial itself was, although it was spread out over so long, actually the events in that trial, the drama, the legal disputes and real legal tension, and the failure of the prosecution, the Hawks, the system here was also very interesting, how it let those two black men down, but it also let justice down in some respects. And that's what I tried to capture.
Were you surprised with the outcome of the trial? Where we're standing now?
That's a tricky question. I think a lot of, in a way, I don't really want to go there because it's not my job to take sides. I think that the judge, based on the evidence that was presented to her in court, made a rational, defendable decision. I think the issues come about the performance of the prosecution, the length of time it took, all sorts of things. And of course, we still know from the prosecution that they plan to appeal her judgment on legal grounds. So we still don't have sentencing on some of the charges that on which the men were found guilty. And that could take a long time as well. So it feels like justice is just going to rumble on in this process.
I'm going to chat to you after the 7 o'clock news. I've still got some questions. And I think, asking some difficult questions. But that's how we get to understand each other. So just stay tuned. Thanks. ons gesels met Andrew Harding. Hy het 'n boek geskryf, These Are Not Gentle People, A True South African Story, en dit gaan oor die Parys 6 en die hele hofsaak is al 4 jaar en ek dink is in Desember wat ouens gevonnis gaan word. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Oh, great stuff to have you back. I was just like, thought, with the Skype, new world, sometimes we're just scared I'm losing you. Andrew, the difficult thing here, and I think that's why I'm so, I can't wait to read the book, and I'm probably going to be the most honest on TV in a long time. No, I'm always honest, but on a personal level, I've been through an armed robbery where a guy tells you with a gun, the whole time he's going to shoot you. I opened just Network 24, News 24, and a guy yesterday in Bloemfontein, one of my old towns, the gun didn't go off, 3 times. So you could have been dead. And then also, I'm out of my world. I mean, there's a guy that stole some laundry, and 3 other black guys, they basically killed him. So there's this thing, and what I want to say, and I think that's the dodgy part, is after an armed robbery and someone threatening your life, that I can't think of hurting someone. But with PTSD and all this stuff, I can't guarantee how my reaction is going to be if I wake up with a guy, I don't care if he's Chinese, black or white, what I'm going to do. And that for me is a major psychological problem in South Africa with the crime. And I think that will be a great book as well. So just your take on that, because I think the balance between the scaredness, this madness, and people are really angry.
No, I completely agree. And, obviously when I went down to Paris and made it clear to people I wanted to write a book about this, understandably, a lot of the white farmers involved said, why are you picking this story? This isn't a typical story. You're telling a story that somehow doesn't represent the truth. My argument, that I really believe, is that a story like this that cuts against the grain allows you to see a much broader, more complicated picture, and I'll explain why. Bottom line is, I spent a lot of this book trying to explain why those young farmers and older white farmers who answered the panic button, why they were so angry, why were they so fearful. And of course, it goes back to their own experiences, as you say, of farm violence, of attacks, of the fact that an elderly couple, the Van Rooyens, had been brutally assaulted, tortured, and murdered. An elderly woman hidden, her body buried in a fridge while she was still alive. And all the farmers told me that as they rushed to the scene to catch these 2 suspected thieves, they were thinking of the sight of the police taking away this elderly woman's body in the back of this police car in the freezer, still frozen inside the freezer, and they had to take it into Paris to freeze out. So, I think there's real trauma, and that explains in some part why they treated these 2 black men, who were, it needs to be said, unarmed at the time when they were caught and posed no risk, but they were subjected to a prolonged assault by, at least a dozen people there admitted under oath that they had assaulted them. Now, different people have come up with different theories and said, well, maybe it was just, a light kicking, and then the damage was done to the 2 men. The real reason they died happened later, the way they were treated in the back of a police van, the way they were treated in hospital. And all that goes into the book. And I'm not really trying to judge the men who assaulted those 2 farm workers. I'm trying to understand it from every different perspective and to understand the process of justice, which I still believe shows some of the institutional rot, some of the challenges this country faces in terms of its justice system.
And then my last question, you've been in South Africa for a couple of years now, and I think if I've got it right, 3 sons. After all the stories you've seen from all over the world, I mean, you've seen some of the worst places and cruelty. What still makes you positive about the human race and South Africa?
It's a very good question. As you say, it's very easy. I've been to cover at least 20, 25 armed conflicts over the last 30 years. And I've seen how quickly countries can go downhill. So I have within me a sort of fearfulness when I see countries in trouble. And yet, here in South Africa, I mean, I think the comparison we make here wrongly is with Zimbabwe, with Somalia. There's other countries on the continent that have suddenly gone downhill very fast. I think there are huge challenges facing South Africa, but it's more like Brazil or Argentina or Turkey, countries that are, they've still got these huge resources, this huge potential, and they are going through really difficult struggles. But I'm trying to think of a single story. I mean, I go back to the World Cup and think, gosh, it's only a decade since that South Africa put that on. And with the right leadership and the right politics, I think that's the problem. The leadership is all very well, but the politics here are messed up. You need proper multi-party democracy, and South Africa keeps getting close to it, but not quite far enough. And I think there needs to be found a way to accelerate that process, because I think politicians improve and change when they're out of power. Certainly that's my experience from Britain and other countries.
Andrew, what a privilege for this interview, and I hope this book sells by the thousands, and I think everyone needs to read it. Yes, thank you for your time.
All the best.
Cheers. En dit was Andrew Harding, die boek se naam is These Are Not Gentle People, A True South African Story, en ek dink dit is baie goed dat ons mekaar se stories luister, want dit is maar rof in hierdie land.